Hi, I'm Lost, and welcome. Before we get started, I want you to know that what is said in this video are my opinions and my deconstruction of the text. And although this may be an interpretation, it is one that I am basing off a historic reality and literature theory. My goal in this video is not to debate people online, because Attack on Titan fans are quite toxic. But instead, my aim is to illustrate where Japanese fascism stems from, and to show viewers who are puzzled by how and why Attack on Titan has been adopted by online fascists, the alt-right, white supremacists, and also the far right. How will I do this? Well, I'll be showing all of you how Attack on Titan first operates as propaganda for militarism, and secondly how it operates as a fascistic piece of work. But I also want to showcase that if writers do not denounce these ideas, they can be dangerous, because there are words that can kill. The rumbling of the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 would open the Showa period. This earthquake had ripple effects as it devastated economic markets and would soon bring the rumbling of angry workers. But the rumbling of the workers would be suppressed by another kind of rumbling that would take hold as Japan spiraled into the 1930s and through the 1930s. It was one of boots that trampled throughout the streets. This militaristic rumbling would spread as Imperial Japan began to conquer Southeast Asia. These rumbling boots could be heard in Korea, in China, Vietnam, in Indonesia, and the Philippines. In all of these places, the Japanese trampled on other people's lands, and those who were sent on such a mission were told that this was Japan's destiny, and that those who were not pure Japanese were inferior. It was this justification that caused Japan to shine its so-called purifying light on others. But was the underpinning ideology of all of this militarism? Was it what some call ultranationalism? Or were there more fascistic ideologies at play? To answer those questions, I took a step back and took a look at the works of Tosaka Jun, a Japanese Marxist in the 1920s and the 1930s, who disagreed with what modern historians see and call Imperial Japan. If you've never heard of his name, that's because post-war Japan took extensive efforts to erase Tosaka and his works. Why? Because Tosaka was an anti-fascist who critiqued liberalism and fascism, but his ideas were also seen as dangerous because he was able to showcase a Japanese form of fascism that is now known as Japanism. To see more on Japanism, there's an amazing podcast, and you could also check out Tosaka's own work, as they've been translated by many historians and many cultural scholars alike. Also, I'm not really going to dive into a definition of fascism, because I'll be getting into it later. If you want to see a concrete definition of fascism, I highly suggest that you check out the video above. It's somewhere up there. Go check it out. But not right now, because I'm talking. So when you're done watching this video, go check it out. It's good. It's a good video. I like it. Tosaka began to examine the Japanese form of fascism before the 1931 Manchurian incident. What alarmed Tosaka was how liberals ran to fascism after the Great Kanto earthquake, which brought a crisis in capitalism. But the devastation of the earthquake was also a signal for fascists that it was their time to create a new society, a new order. And Tosaka stood witness. As the crisis was at hand, he saw the middle class join with the industrialists and work together to oppress the workers and the left. Now, this form of fascism differed from Italy and from Germany because it began from the grassroots and reached the top. Fascism in the 1930s was seen as a positive thing in Japan. Those who promoted fascism saw it as something that could bring a cure to modernism. And what Tosaka illustrates was that fascism was in the common discourse in the literature of Japan. What Tosaka writes mostly about was how fascist literature was created to pull liberals into the Japanese cause, but he also saw an atmosphere of fascism get created as the state or the military paired up with far-right and fascist writers. So after 1931, after the Manchurian incident, what is seen is that the military becomes much more violent against the ruling class. But once the military takes over, they instantaneously pair with right-wing raiders to promote a culture of fascism. What a culture of fascism means is to make fascism seem as common sense and normal. And this is why Tosaka thought it was very important to criticize and critique literature, because he thought that if the common people read and got more absorbed in this culture, you would have social cohesion on a new level. And he began warning people, and you can imagine this is early, right? This is like he saw this in the 1920s and he began writing about this, and he's seeing this unfold throughout the 30s, and it's quite remarkable as a historian reading about this. Anyways, back to Tosaka. So after the Manchurian incident of 1931, he began to combat and critique fascist literature and the culture of fascism that was now being supported by the military. This was a culture that mythologized the past, such as the samurai. It created an ideal for people to match up to, whether it be in health or in diet. It was a culture that promoted a pure, harmonious, and beautiful society. It was a culture that desired and commanded loyalty, obedience, and total dedication to the emperor and the state. It was a culture that was pro-military. It valorized death, valorized blood and combat, and finally it took aim at anyone who was deviant, such as the left, the non-Japanese, the Korean. All of these people became the enemy within who threatened this new order and this new society. With enemies on the inside, there also had to be an enemy on the outside. And before America joined the war, this enemy was the Soviet Union and the communists. But as Japan took over and began to justify its conquest, these enemies also became those in Southeast Asia who were battling against the Japan. Against the Japan? Battling against the Japanese. So here are some examples. Like the Italian form of fascism, Japanism sought social cohesion, where Mussolini imagined his nation as a bundle of stick united as one under the command of his voice. The Japanese saw it more like they were a unified body that could sing harmoniously together, and where everyone may dedicate their hearts to the Japanese cause and the Japanese nation. And those who did not, like Italy, were met with terror and violence. The communists, the left, anyone who dissented were sent to prison and underwent conversions. Like the German fascists, the Nazis, Japan adopted the organic state model, where the only way for it to grow and become prosperous was to take over other areas, such as Korea in 1910, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Burma, Thailand. All of these were areas where Japan thought it could colonize and become prosperous off the wealth of the colonizer. And much like the Nazis, the Japanese believed in racial supremacy. Now, this was not white supremacy, as the Japanese were anti-white and anti-West, but the Japanese adopted and took on the Yamato race, this mythological origins of Japan. And it was this racial supremacy that justified Japan's manifest destiny over all of Asia. They were to become the benevolent ruler that oversees all of the Asians. A bunch of bullshit. Now, unlike Germany and Italy, Japanism is and was flexible, as it did not require a Führer or a strongman, as the Japanese emperor was only really a figurehead, and he was not like Hitler or Mussolini who commanded their people. Rather, it was the military. And so Tosaka showcases a unique case study of fascism, where liberals turned to fascism, and yes, they were directed by the military, yes, there was propaganda, but it did not require an emperor. It started from the grassroots, from the middle class. This will become relevant when we enter the finale of Attack on Titan, but it's important, and it's almost as if Tosaka is saying that even if the emperor was killed, Japanese fascism would still live on because it was born out of liberalism and not dependent on a leader. And for an example, once the defeat of Nazi Germany occurred, where the USSR and the Americans swept in and the state started crumbling and Hitler took his life, you could see the defeat of that national fascism. With Japanism, what Tosaka is saying is that it can still live beyond the emperor, and this will become relevant when we get into that finale of Attack on Titan. But keep it in mind, let's put a pin in this, and let's go on to propaganda and Pacific War. Let's talk about the origins of manga, of comics, and yeah, let's get into the depressing stuff. Oh, hooray! It's gonna be a lot sadder. A lot sadder. It's gonna become sadder. Yeah, don't fall into propaganda, kids. Okay, it's not good for your health, and believing in this shit, it's not fun. Okay, so I'm gonna rip some stuff apart, and it's gonna become darker, but hopefully not too dark. You know, I'm gonna have hopefully ponies and rainbows and stuff like that to lighten the mood. And yeah, enjoy this dark video. Why are my videos always dark? Why are they always sad? Why are they The origins of what is now modern manga and comics can be traced to the Second World War, where in the United States you had a lot of Jewish writers and artists drawing Superman punching Nazis. But there was another use of said comics. As historian John W. Dowler illustrates in his book A War Without Mercy, in America, comics were used to spread war propaganda, and he does this best by showing his readers how racist the USA were when they portrayed the Japanese. And then he takes that and he flips it, showing the Japanese side and how they used manga to present and spread war propaganda. The racist propaganda the Americans produced served two purposes. First, they were made to cement an image of the enemy, and secondly, they were meant to dehumanize the Japanese, as they were portrayed as apes, monkeys, and barbarians. After Pearl Harbor, America waged a war without mercy. On the other hand, America also invested and backed Walt Disney and had them create war propaganda. The animated films Disney created were used by the United States Armed Forces to indoctrinate soldiers. The most popular of these films was the 1942 film A Prelude to War. Of course, after the Pacific War, this propaganda did not vanish and disappear, but it would be reutilized when America came to face the Vietnamese and the Soviet Union in the Cold War. On the other side of the ocean, there was Japan, which had manga since the 12th century, but modern and present-day manga and anime are both deeply tied to propaganda produced in the Second World War. For an example, Kitsusawa Rikaten, a founder of what is now known as modern manga, began by creating art that was critical of the government, but by 1929, he was working for a government-organized cartoon society meant to produce manga and to support the war effort. Pulling Tosaka back into this is vital, because Tosaka adds to how those who were initially writing and creating art that was critical of the government were turned. Tosaka examines this by looking at how the government converted communists, liberals, and leftists, and anyone who opposed the government. Those who gave in were placed in such organizations to create war propaganda, while other right-wing and liberal writers paired instantaneously with the military and began to create and back a culture of fascism. Part of Japanese manga before the Americans joined was focused on Japan's divine place in Asia, and Bauer showcases the comic or the panel of the people of the southern region, and we'll get back to that. But Bauer also showcases that Japan was also hyper-focused on beauty. However, things change as Japan enters the Pacific War with America, as the purifying sun was no longer directed on those in the colonies, but it was also used when showing how Japan would defeat or vanquish its enemies. Other strips featured the mythological Momotaro, but the Oni in these comics was often America or the USSR or Britain and France. Comics that featured Momotaro probably influenced those creating the first anime in 1945, Momotaro's Defiant Sea Warriors, which was never released, but it was meant to show the Japanese public that Japan would have a swift and fast victory over America, and to convince them that they will defeat them and everything will go well because Momotaro is on Japan's side. Did they actually defeat the Americans? Well, not with guns and bullets, but with anime. So let's go back to that comic/manga panel of People of the Southern Region. This panel was created in 1942 since it appeared in Osaka Puck. We can deduce that it was meant for the Japanese people, and looking at the image one can see how the Japanese justify their conquest of the southern region. The Japanese are portrayed not as colonizers. No. They are the liberators. Now, Dower does a great job ripping this panel apart as he highlights the purifying sun, which is washing away the European presence. But does the purifying sun also purify the impure Indonesian native? Bauer also highlights the light-colored hand shaking the so obedient brown-colored native, which indicates Japanese supremacy, and that there is also a hierarchy being set by those who are called civilized. Bauer also highlights the clothing, but also the proper place of the indigenous person. The Japanese are the commanders, while the indigenous are the laborers that are in their place in the colonial system. This is almost borrowing from American comics that historian Matthew Fry Jacobson showcases in his book Barbarian Virtues. Finally, I want all of us to note that smile on the indigenous person's face, that they themselves welcome the colonizer and are overjoyed to be working for the Japanese, when in reality those in Korea, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines hated being enslaved by the Japanese. Both the Koreans and the Chinese would fight against the Imperial Army and defeat them. Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh would organize and fight a bitter war, driving out both the French and the Japanese. And so did the people in the Philippines. This is because the Japanese may have driven out the European colonizers, but they replaced them and took on the same role. Hence, it is almost hypocritical for the Japanese to call themselves liberators, and this further cements the historical truth that the Japanese were not anti-colonial. They were colonial, and it was the Chinese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, the Indonesians, and the Philippines who were anti-colonial, who were anti-fascist. If I were to list off all the crimes Imperial Japan committed, this video would be over 5 hours long. So instead, I'm going to give 3 examples, and some of them will be relevant to Attack on Titan. The first of these crimes is forced labor. Although people call it forced labor, let's be honest here, it's basically slavery. And I could trace this thread throughout the Japanese Empire, and I could easily point at the 1910 to 1945 occupation of Korea and bring up examples of how Japan forced the Koreans to mine their coal, farm their farms, and how they planted them in China to colonize that land for them. But I won't. I won't because I want to exhibit the Burma Railway, which is also known as the Death Railway. It was a 415-kilometer railway that connected Thailand to Burma, and the Japanese forced 250,000 250,000 civilians and about 90,000 Allied prisoners of war to work on the thing. Of the 250,000 civilians, 90,000 of them perished. When researching the Burma Rail, I found it very similar to the Canadian Rail. What is it called? I forgot what it's called. But basically, the entire rail in Canada, which Canada takes pride in, of course, because it unified the nation, but the entire railway in Canada was built on the lives of the Chinese. So Japan, in a sense, replicated what Canada did. And much like Canada, they forced these people to work for them, to work to their deaths. And in many cases, they've left them there to die. And as people research and undig the railway, they have uncovered bodies, much like the Canadian Rail, where Chinese skulls and body parts are still found to this day. And it's a horrific history, and it's a horrific crime. And it reminds one, a lot of infrastructure built in the colonies were in fact built on the backs and on the lives and the corpses of the colonized. In his manga, One Piece, Eiichiro Oda was not as kind as most historians. The mangaka, the author of One Piece, when he featured a bridge that resembled the Burma Railway, you don't have prisoners of war or forced laborers. Those who worked on the fictional version of this railway, the Tequila Wolf, were slaves. And maybe in another video I'll focus on how other mangas authors dealt with Japan's bloody and problematic history. But the thing is to understand is that the Burma Railway and its impacts live on today. This is a crime that is not recognized by Japan and is just completely forgotten. Like, it was publicized by the French and the Allies to pin the crime on Japan. And to this day, there are people who are suffering from it, and Japan has not taken any responsibility and rather deflects any crime that has been committed in the Burma Railway or the Death Railway. The second example that I want to bring in is the rape of Nanjing, or the Nanjing Massacre, which spanned from 1937 to 1938. This crime really made me stop reading and writing because it was really depressing. But let's dive into this crime that has never been recognized by the state of Japan. Amanda Weiss, in her book Contested Images of Rape, starts her introductory chapter, by quoting Chinese historian Da Qin Yang. And the quote that Weiss pulls from Yang is quite powerful, as it gives the reader a concise image of what happened. Quote, "The Japanese troops in Nanjing engaged in organized and wholesale murder, committed indiscriminate killing and rape, as well as looting and destruction. Over 200,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war were believed to have been murdered in the Nanjing area during a 6-week period in the winter of 1937 and 1938, while approximately 20,000 cases of rape occurred within the city alone. The verdict of Nanjing trial was similar, except for a higher death toll of over 30,000. End of quote. Now, Weiss continues by explaining how the Nanjing Massacre has been largely submerged in popular memory until the Sino-Japanese and Sino-American normalization of the 1970s. What she's saying here is that in the 1970s and the 1960s, Chinese scholars appeared to challenge the contested memory of Nanjing that the Japanese presented. And we could tie this to the present, because to this day, Japan has not recognized this as a crime and would not, because both the Japanese and the Americans after the Second World War did an excellent job trying to cover up these crimes, because Japan became a satellite for American imperialism. And you could imagine that all this stuff is being uncovered and you're being presented this evidence, and Japan is just like, nope, we didn't do that. You know who did it? It was the individual soldiers on the ground. That was not the state's, belief. They went rogue. They're rogue soldiers who were not commanded to do this. And we'll get into why this is problematic, because the rape of Nanjing, the massacre of Nanjing, is something that is so disgusting, and it's contested because a lot of Japanese people or historians look at these reports and say, is this really fictional? Is this really true? And maybe this is because it wasn't really investigated directly after it happened, right? That it was uncovered, and then you had the Chinese Soviets, the Chinese communists coming in to take over, not take over, it was their land, to kick out the Japanese. And so in that transitional period, Imperial Japanese and America could just cover it up and just wash it away, just deny it. And that's quite problematic. So let's get into the grim details of it, and I'm going to be doing this by showing you 3 reports. These reports were compiled by Japanese and Chinese historians, and they've been featured in many books, and one of the historians that showcases them is Frank Jacob in his book, Japanese War Crimes During World War II, Atrocities, and the Psychology of Collective Violence. So instead of citing a Chinese historian to start the book off, Frank Jacob instead cites a Japanese historian, Kazuhara Tokushi, and she provides a very reasonable definition for the rape of Nanjing, also known as the Nanjing Massacre. Kazuhara describes it as the term Nanking Massacre refers to the totality of atrocities committed by Japanese troops against Chinese soldiers and civilians during the attack of Nanking. These atrocities were illegal from the perspective of both international law on combat behavior and international humanitarian law. Frank Jacob picks it up and describes it as the Japanese army occupied the Chinese capital and did so until the end of the Second World War. But it was during the first few months of that occupation that the Japanese soldiers went rogue and raped, tortured, and murdered at least 200,000 civilians. Now, as I go through the reports that Jacob features and exhibits, I want you to think about, why did the Japanese do this? How could they do this? Or if you kind of try to defend them by placing responsibility on the individual soldier, remember everything I told you in part 1 and part 2. Japanism on the outside was meant to dehumanize the enemy through literature and military training, that it was so ingrained in these soldiers' minds that they could commit these acts. And it further leads to the idea that the Japanese thought themselves as superior. And if you're thinking about this from the Japanese perspective, like imagine you're a Japanese soldier on the front. You are the superior. You are going to be the victor. You won't face any consequences from these crimes. And yet, Japan was not the victor. Japan lost and was defeated by China, by Korea. And so it becomes muddy because Japan came out of the war without facing responsibility. Anyways, let's get into the reports. These are quite gruesome, so if you want to skip ahead, please do. I'm going to give you like a time frame to skip. Report number 1, the killing contest, which is and are considered fictional by the Japanese, but considering that the Americans collected trophies of the Japanese that they killed, such as golden teeth, ears, and Japanese skulls, these war games, these fictional war games, can and were a reality. The killing contest here is similar to Lord of the Rings, where Gimli and Legolas do a body count. But here it's not the orcs, but it's civilians. And the aim of the game is not just to kill, but to decapitate the Chinese. The second kind of report stemmed from doctors who were in a safety zone. And the first comes from James McKillum, who witnessed that women and girls needed constant protection from soldiers who used any chance to get them out of the safety zone and rape them. For McKillum, Nanjing was a nightmare. On the other hand, there was Robert O. Wilson, who was a doctor in the safety zone, and he would write to his family what he witnessed, quoting, "The slaughter of civilians is appalling. I could go on for pages telling of cases of rape and brutality, almost beyond belief. 2 bayoneted cases are the only survivors of 7 street cleaners who were sitting in their headquarters when the Japanese came in without warning or reason and killed 5 and wounded the 2 that found their way to the hospital. I wonder when it will stop and we will be able to catch up with ourselves again. Jacobson adds to this by saying that Wilson called the rape in Nanjing the modern Dante's Inferno, and he kept writing huge letters about blood and rape and witnessing the wholesale murder of thousands of cases. And there seemed to be no stop to the ferocity and the lust of these Japanese soldiers. And this bleeds into the third reports that saw some Japanese soldiers laughing and applauding at the sight of a still living person who was burning to death after being shot and then doused with gasoline. Other Japanese soldiers beheaded refugees and put their heads on bayonet to parade through the streets. Although the Japanese soldiers already began their killing on the way to Nanjing, it was there that the conflict fully erupted into a helix of death, causing increasing suffering. Now, were the Japanese told about these? Or were they told that their men and their boys on the front were like courteous samurai who lived by a code? If you look at all these reports, whether they be true or false, there's no Bushido code here. It's just ruthlessness and destruction and death. This is not the samurai that the fascists envisioned. This is not the ideal samurai, because that never existed. It was a myth. The real samurai were just like this. Crime number 3. Human experiments. The final crime that I want to shed light on is Unit 731, which was Japan's biological warfare research unit. The unit was based in Harbin, Manchuria, and was officially titled the Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Department. It was operational from 1936 to 1945, and in those 11 years, thousands of human beings were experimented on and killed. In his 2021 article, Kishore Johnson highlights that despite that there's evidence for these crimes, the Japanese went on unpunished, unlike the Nazis. Furthermore, Johnson links these human experimentations to scientific and Japanese racism, where the Japanese believed themselves being the superior race, the Yamato race, and had the divine right to place other Asians in their proper place. Johnson ties his research to John Dower and that comic of the Indonesians shaking the hand of the Japanese. It becomes more relevant here because in reality the proper place meant being forced into labor, or in this example, the Chinese became research subjects. Furthermore, the proper place was also deeply tied to Japan's superiority over all of Asia, and Dower illuminates this in his image. He's highlighting the slogan of the proper place. And Dower doesn't really do it, but Kishore kind of reads it, and he links it to the Nazi slogan, blood and soil. What I'm showcasing here is that the Japanese fascist ideas, words, images, plays, the abstract that many today in the alt-right believe cause no harm, actually bleed into the real world and have material consequences. What I want you all to understand is that there are words that kill and have killed, that the crimes that were committed in the past bleed into the present and impact the present. And those who are working on the Burma Rail, those who suffered in Nanjing, those who've been experimented on, they have consequences that lead into the future. And to not take responsibility for them, to wipe them away, and to deny their existence, it's honestly a huge slap in the face and extremely disrespectful for those who were impacted. And yeah, I'm showing you American scholars here, right? Like, I'm showing a bias. And you could read into that, but should I be reading and giving you the perspective of the Japanese who deny all of this? I'm not a centrist. I'm not a person who's going to be like, oh, let's play the both sides. No, man, these are historians who've done their research, who have the primary sources, and have the receipts. And I'm showing them here. But that's enough history. Let's tie this to the present, because surprise, surprise, Attack on Titan features most of these crimes. And it also has aspects of the current far-right movement, and that's how they're adopting it, because it speaks to the alternative right and those online. It's time to shred Attack on Titans. I don't know, I'm gonna keep that in. Some people call Ishiyama a genius for creating an anti-war and anti-military manga, and there are snippets where I can see that. The earliest would be when the scouts return, and in their eyes there's just pure depression and despair. Another moment that's more deeper would be the commander of the Scouts, Edwin Smith, feeling immense guilt for sacrificing so many people for his selfish desire to know the true history. The image of him standing on a mountain of dead bodies, on a mountain of corpses, is so powerful, and it is in this moment where one can read Ishiyama's anti-military and anti-war message, that those on the top are selfish bastards and only attain their goals by sacrificing soldiers' lives. Edwin sacrifices his dream and goes on a final charge. And psst, hey, side note here, all of these charges kind of resemble kamikaze attacks, but we're gonna leave that. And so Edwin died, and with him many others. Now, this message is wrecked by the fanatical Floch, who begs Levi to resurrect Edwin, because according to Floch, Edwin was the devil, and it was the devil that was needed for humanity to survive. Hence, in a snap of a finger, the message that was anti-military, the message that showcased the dead, the guilt, vanishes away, because Ishiyama here is saying, yes, Edwin was evil. Yes, he sacrificed hundreds of soldiers, but at the end of the day, that's what humanity needed. That's what humanity needed to survive. Edwin is worshipped by this man and becomes an icon after death. And so, is Attack on Titan really anti-militaristic? Ishiyama may not celebrate the death or valorize those who die in vain, as those who die do not die glorious deaths. But death is not dwelled on. The military casting lives is never questioned. Orders are never challenged, and instead what is seen is an entire society that is dominated by the military, a society where a coup d'etat is celebrated because the old, ineffective leaders are cast out. But what changes? The story of the queen is made into the new puppet. Instead of really being ruled by elites, there's the military. Our main characters, Eren, Armin, and Mikasa, are child soldiers who obey every command the military gives them, and although they are tasked in killing titans, if they are tasked in killing innocent civilians, they would do it. All that is needed for Eren to kill is hatred. And then there's that slogan that every scout, every soldier cheers when they enter the military. Dedicate your heart. But let's put a pin in that one for now. The main character, Eren Yeager, is an interesting case study, as after his mom gets killed by the Titan, Eren vows in pure hatred that he would kill all Titans. A kid with pure hatred, and we are to follow this child and think he is the savior, the hero, and even when the truth is revealed, Eren's hate does not fade away. When the group defeats all of the Titans and liberates the island of the internal and external enemies and reach the ocean, Eren looks beyond the sea, pointing and declaring that beyond the sea there are more enemies that he has to kill, and that only when all of them are dead, he and his friends can be free. What fuels this desire is hatred. It is here where one can see some fascistic rhetoric bleed out, because once Eren says this, he is no longer the hero, but the villain. Fascists in Japan, Italy, Nazi Germany, America, and Israel all cast a group of people to be their enemy within. 3 of the main fascist states in World War II cast the communists as the enemy and used the words such as cancer, for fascism was believed to be the cure. In Germany, there was also the monstrous Jews, who were also linked to communism, and the only way to cure German society was to exterminate all of the Jews. Whenever there's a construction of an enemy within, there's always an external enemy. All fascist states have and had an external enemy who served and do serve as a boogeyman of sorts. But like the enemy within, hatred was directed to them as well. In Imperial Japan, the external enemy was the Soviet Union and America, and the notion of modernism. In Germany, it was the communist threat posed by the USSR, and also the liberal West. America, during the Second World War, also followed a similar pattern as the external enemy for for the most part were the Japanese. This fascistic dichotomy of the enemy within and the enemy abroad is bred from fear. For an example, the USA after 9/11 was overwashed with fear, and the enemy abroad and within were this vague grouping of Muslims. Muslim Americans became, according to Bush, ticking time bombs, and many innocent people in America and Iraq and Afghanistan perished because of this thought. In all of these countries, there's a politics of fear that is used to repaint the enemy. In present-day America, the enemy is connected to the Chinese or the Russians, right? At the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, everyone went out and said, hey, there are Russians living here. They may be the enemy within. And you may ask, how is this fascistic? According to Umberto Eco's Fascism, fascists tend to have an obsession with a plot, where there are enemies within and abroad planning or scheming a state's demise. Eren Yeager's hatred is deeply connected to an obsession with a plot. And this is after he learned the truth that was in his father's basement. The hatred subsides even after he knows that there are other Eldians suffering. He, the hero, proclaims that everyone across the ocean is his enemy, and the only way for the island to be free is if they all die. Every human being, for Eren, is deserving of death. The truth Ishiyama reveals does not change Eren nor the story, but rather it makes it much more worse and much more fashy. So let's go over this truth. The true history found in the basement explains to the reader that there are people out there beyond the sea, and it repositions the characters and places them in the grandness of the world. The entire story until this point was focused on a tiny island, and in truth there's an entire continent. It is here where readers learn that there are the three spies that infiltrated the island. Bertolt, Reiner, and Annie, the three main antagonists, came from the nation of Marley, and so did Eren's dad. The Eldians on the mainland are akin to the Jews in real world, as they are stamped with Arab mats and are confined to internment zones. They are placed there because they are being punished, and the entire world fears them. Readers learn that Eren's dad lost his sister because he escaped the walls one day with her, and it was here where Grisha, Eren's dad, learns the cruelty of the world. Due to escaping the internment zone, the Marley police punish Grisha and his sister by having her eaten by dogs. It is this cruelty that causes Grisha to despise the state and rightly hate Marley. We learn that as Grisha grows up, he finds and joins a secret organization. However, this is where I think Ishiyama messes up, as this Marlin state clearly resembles Nazi Germany, and many leaders paired the Eldians to the Jews. But Grisha does not join an anti-fascist or anti-Marlin resistance group, or general Eldian liberation group, but the Eldian Restorationalists. We're going to put a pin in that in a second, but from the name one can deduce that this group seeks to restore the Eldian Empire, and we'll get into why this is problematic, but for now, I'll say that the goal of the Eldian Empire is exactly the same as Hitler's Make Germany Great Again, or in recent memory, Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. This grand plan is to bring back the powerful Eldian Empire and end Eldian oppression by putting Marley back into its place, by crushing it with the power of the founder, which can start a thing known as the rumbling. But let's put a pin in that for a second, because Eren's version of the Eldian Restorationists is much more fascist. At the end of the flashback, we learn that the Eldian Restorationists based in Marley fails and gets caught because Grisha's son Zeke and Eren's older half-brother snitches. The truth reveals that all titans that surround Paradise and on the walls were in fact Eldians from Marley who were turned into titans as punishment. Although Ishiyama never provides details into how the Titan serum was created, there's had to be human experiments. Later in the manga we learn Zeke, the Wonder Boy, would help the state create weapons out of his spinal fluid which enable Marley to drop pure titans like bombs or plant Eldians in cities and have them spring up in the center to terrorize the enemies of Marley. So let's move on to the fascism in Attack on Titans. even begin this? That was the question that I kept asking myself. When I finished Attack on Titans, I went to Roberto Echo first, and I was like, okay, I could look down all 14 points and compare it to that, and it didn't really match up. So then I was like, okay, let's look at Tosaka, let's look into this Japanism, let's look into the Japanese relation to fascism, and then I was like, okay, this is getting closer, but it's not really hitting the nail. And that's when I ran into Emilio Gentili in his 2000 article where he concises his points and his findings, which is, the article is called Fascism and the Italian Road to Totalitarianism. And one has to really understand is that fascism in Attack on Titans is hard to pin down because it is like Japanese, a form of fascism that is flexible and works almost in stealth. And to uncover it, one has to read critically and deconstruct it like it's propaganda. So I leaned on scholars of fascism. My primary scholar became Emilio Gentili, and my secondary scholars were Roberto Echo and Tosaka Shun. The reason why I'm using 3 is because fascism in Attack on Titan includes multiple forms of fascism, which includes modern and neo-fascism. Emilio Gentili begins to uncover the road to totalitarianism by examining the militia parties that sprung up in Italy. And since Attack on Titan is so focused on the military, it is almost inevitable for a militia group to form, and they are the Jägerists. When and how they were created is vague, but they are the followers of Eren Yeager. It can be assumed that Yelena has her own form of this, as she worships Zeke and Eren, but Ishiyama does not make it clear to when and how the masses and the soldiers became Jägerists. And we'll get to the masses, but for now, let's focus on the Jägerists in the military, because these Jägerists are the ones who commit terrorist attacks and take over the nation under the command of Eren. They are like the brown shirts of Italy, but let's push the Jägerists and the brown shirts aside for a second. In his second point, Gentili emphasizes the mythic thought, but other scholars have emphasized the mythic origin. In Italy, there was the Roman Empire. In Germany, there was Hitler, who wanted to make Germany great again. And he even went to the lengths of creating fake history to tie the Germans to the Aryans. Finally, in America, there was, and still is, Manga. Now, Eren and the Jägers seek to restore the Eldian Empire through the Rumbling. The entire project of the Elden Restorationists and the Jägers is based and cemented in a mythic past, and the true history is actually one of blood and horror. But Eren and the Jägers do not deny this bloody and horrific history, because they want to bring it back into reality and basically inflict another wave of horror to wash away the hatred of the continent. It is here where we return to the Jägerists, who impose their rule through violence, repression, and terror. This point of C is also linked to Gentili's point of E, discrimination against the outsider. The Jägerists hate the people of Mari, and as Ishiyama illustrates, would not hesitate to execute them publicly. This discrimination against the outside can be linked to Eren and his final solution. But first, let's talk about point B, demagoguery. To the Jägerists and the public, Eren is seen and treated like a god, a savior, a demagogue. When he escapes prison and walks up shirtless, you get a sense that Eren is the strong man, and how he is drawn provides the reader with an illusion. The reader is constantly told that Eren is going to solve the problem beyond the walls, that he will wipe away the resentment and save humanity. People and the reader just have to trust him. Also, when looking at the image of Eren donning his hoodie, there's the sun that is rising. Could that be a purifying sun? Furthermore, to the Jägerists, they proclaim that the people are now free because of Eren. He is the liberator. These words have meaning. The masses buy into it. For an example, when Eren is in prison, Ishiyama presents a hysterical crowd that begs the military to free Eren, for he is the savior of the island, and the only one who could restore the Eldian Empire. Eren, to these people, is a hero for taking revenge. There is a call for more blood. After the Jaegerists take over, and the masses rally behind Thumb and Eren, it is as if the masses are acting and voicing their thoughts as one. The fascist slogan that is being used here is "Dedicate your heart," and drawing back to gentility, this is the masses in complete subordination to the Jaegerists. The phrase even spells out what is truly meant, as when one dedicates their heart, they are presenting total dedication to the new state and to its leader, Eren. What one has to understand is that fascism is a mechanism that is and has been used to socially control the masses. And Ishiyama is illustrating a mass of people completely under the spell of Eren, even as he marches to trample on the world. Now, skipping past Eren and his final solutions, Ishiyama presents an ending of Attack on Titan that is pro-fascist and showcases Japanism. Even when Eren dies, the Jaegerists and their fascist movement does not end with Eren's death, but it continues, and this is because the form of fascism that is operating here is Japanism. Japanism does not require a central leader to guide the masses, but rather functions of loyalty of the citizens and their dedication to the state. Attack on Titan is a story where fascism wins as the island cries out as one, and although they wiped out 80% of the world, there is still fear, and the war continues. This connects to what Umberto Eco wrote in his 9th point, focusing on permanent warfare. Wherefore for the fascists, there is a never-ending war, and that no peace can exist. That is what Ishiyama is presenting in this ending. The final lines the people chant can be linked to Imperial Japan's defeat and modern-day Japan. The way I read the ending was that this is the Japan Ishiyama envisions. One that is remilitarized, one where people dedicate their hearts to fight, and one that cries out as one. The very line, "the island cried out as one," can be tied to what Tosaka Jun witnessed and wrote about as a key component to Japanism was when all of the Japanese people sang harmoniously. One nation under a rising sun. However, the final chant of the Jaegerists may be what Ishiyama desires the most, and how he sees the defeat of Imperial Japan. The line, "If we lose, we die," is deeply tied to Japan in World War II, as people's lives were sacrificed so the rulers may live. It was a cult of death, where citizens were commanded to fight to the death. But the second line is connected to modern-day Japan and remilitarization. If we don't fight, we can't win. Meaning that since Japan has been bound for 70 years, if a threat from the continent comes, they will lose. And so Ishiyama ends by sending a message to the Japanese, so they may fight. Fight. Attack on Titan ends by validating the words of a maniac, an edgelord who used this logic to mass murder 80% of the population. And to Ishiyama, Eren was right. The fight will continue until either Eldia disappears or the world does. This is the same logic used by Japan in World War II, as it was a war without mercy, a war where the Japanese and Americans sought to exterminate each other, and as a political take, it is very childish and very dangerous, because what Ishiyama is promoting and supporting are final-like solutions. There are two final solutions in the manga. The first is Zeke's euthanization plan, and the second is Eren's rumbling, where Eren mass murders 80% of the world, but let's be real here, his true aim was to clean the world and kill everyone. The euthanization plan is much more complex because it has layers. The first layer is anti-Semitism, and I think the final arc operates as both anti-Semitic and fascist. It can be both, and the reason why I say it's anti-Semitic is because the Eldian and Marley are interned much like the Jews in the Second World War, and they are seen and labeled as the devils or monsters with tainted blood. And these are the same terms the Nazis used when they othered the Jews. But layered above this self-guilt is inner hatred, because the Marleyan state kept promoting a politics of fear and forced every generation of Eldians to shoulder the sins of their father. What is even more twisted is that the ruler of Marley turns out to be an Eldian, who has been using interned Eldians to wage war and expand the empire of Marley. Furthermore, this leader is also a symbol of anti-Semitism because he hates his blood and his people. So Zeke, the Wonder Child. But before he was the Wonder Child, he was a failure, and his father was a total dick. The pressure, the hatred, the fear, and the knowledge of what his father was up to spurred Zeke to snitch and devise a plan of euthanization. This plan stemmed from a janitor who threw piss water on his family and told them to never breed, and questioned why Eldians even breed. And so Zeke, a child of royal blood, understands that he could activate the founder and command it to destroy Eldia and the future of its people. Although this does not happen, the eugenics plan is never condemned, but rather framed as a saving grace, a gift. Now, this is also framed as the weaker position, because Zeke is refusing to fight, and the reason why I say Attack on Titan can be read as both is because of Eren and the Jaegers, who are clearly fascists. However, eugenics? That's a plan that's often connected to white supremacists, fascists, Nazis. That's what they desire. It's a form of ethnic cleansing. In the past, white people have used eugenics to wipe out African Americans, indigenous people, and Jewish people. So it's a plan that's synonymous and deeply linked to the far right, and since it is, it makes me question to why Ishiyama chose it. It's very questionable, and there's different angles where you could read it, but it's a disgusting solution for such a huge problem. And, you know, Ishiyama, if I was your editor, I would be like, man, we really want to do eugenics? You know, that's some history. There are some people, there are some readers out there who face this and still face it, you know? Like, fuck this. On the other hand, Eren Yeager's plan is one that famous YouTuber FD Signifier attributes with doomerism and nihilism. That the only way to solve the problem is to destroy the world and start over. Although FD Signifier's point stands, and I'm hoping to see what arrives in his second part of nihilism, doomerism, I see the rumbling as a fascist final solution, where for Eren, the only way to remove those who hate Eldians on Paradise Island is to kill them all. To Eren, the people on the continent are not human beings, but animals who deserve to be trampled on. Eren, in my reading, is like Adolf Hitler. Firstly, Hitler believed in a dog-eat-dog world. A kill or be killed world. He also had thoughts on the weak and the fate that they deserved. Hitler also believed that those who are not Aryan all deserve to be cleansed off the face of the earth. Of course, this cleansing began with the Jews, but there were others. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler states his desire to clean all who are not pure Aryans, but also all who are useless to society. If you read Attack on Titan, there is an attack on the weak, on those who are useless, those who do not fight. And I think this is linked to the rhetoric that Hitler used. But going back, right, tying this back, the mass murder or genocide Eren commits resembles the final solutions these fascists devise. It's like reading a nightmare. And if you're sane, there's no way Eren is in the right. However, it is in this orgy of death and violence that readers will see the ideal freedom that Ishiyama desires. And it is a freedom that stems with the mass killing of those who pose a threat and hate the Eldians. This freedom is tied to having supreme power and crushing any life with the boot. Right-wing readers all claim that this manga is about freedom and liberty, but this type of freedom is disgusting. It is a freedom from responsibility, a freedom to kill any who oppose you, to kill any who despise you, to kill and kill without any recourse. This fascist freedom is absolutely disgusting, and the fact to Ishiyama true or pure freedom can only come from supreme power only highlights my point that this is a fascistic piece of propaganda. Now here's a bombshell. In my research, I ran into a manga called Showa, and in it the legendary mangaka Shigeru Mizuki draws a panel of Japanese troops trampling on Korean soil. And the mangaka writes, "Oh, the Koreans have been trampled on time and time again." I think this entire manga, Attack on Titans, is actually centered on Japan. And what we're reading here is Ishiyama's fear that the Koreans and the Chinese will one day retaliate for the crimes that Japan has committed against them. And so Ishiyama is showing the Japanese a solution, that they should and can remilitarize and cause a rumbling to trample on those that hate them. If you've watched or listened up to this point, you may be asking, why does EJ care so much? Why should I care so much? There are those that claim that Attack on Titans is a manga or an anime about freedom and liberty, that it's about big, naked titans fighting against each other. But is it really? The reason why I care so much is because the online alt-right has taken a liking to Attack on Titan and have used the manga and anime to be edgier. This entire video is jumping off what Indiendo Studios began. One of the most prominent videos Indiendo created was how to radicalize a normie. And I and many others have began to notice that Attack on Titan also plays a part in this massive web that radicalizes normies in online spaces. And I think this is one method where a normal liberal reads Attack on Titan, which is and has fascist propaganda, and they go online because they're confused and they find the alt-right. The normie becomes radicalized, and throughout my research for this video, I've read hundreds of comments where Attack on Titan fans deny it is fascism or Japanism and try to rebuttal with, oh, it's just a silly manga. But there are others who cheer and support Eren's mass murder. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, but there was an Ottoman-like boy who was a refugee. The group meets them in their first visit to Marley, and when the rumbling occurs, we see it through his eyes. We see him and his brother get gruesomely crushed. For Eren, it was inevitable. This was fate, and how likely will this action against harmless and innocent refugees translate into the real world? We live in a world where young white men are believing in the Great Replacement Theory and have been shooting and killing Muslims, African Americans, and maybe trans people too. There's also a discourse about the idea of the sins of the father. People think it's stupid that the Eldians should carry guilt for the crimes their ancestors committed, and when Eren crushes Marley, some of these readers have cheered and translated his actions as him being proud of his ancestors. This pride of crimes and justifying them bleeds into the real world. And all of this is critically linked to Japan's war crimes, but also the genocides the Americans and Canadians have committed. Hey Americans, you're sitting and living on stolen lands. Are you really proud of that? When I was in my master's, my friend featured an awesome article in his essay. It talked about how colonizers erase indigenous presence and settler crimes from history. It was called The Depths of the Pile, White Settler Tautologies and Pioneer Lies. I'd recommend you to check it out. To those who are claiming that they are not responsible or should be blamed for what their ancestors did, I think you all should really think about what part you are playing in this white settler colonial narrative and society. These narratives are originally created by settlers and are then passed on to the next generation. Each generation plays a part in escaping responsibility and denying guilt. But know this, each generation shoulders the sins of their father. And as Ludwig Porcel wrote in his kick-ass song, Sins of the Father, the sins never die. On the other hand, you have white supremacists who are justifying Eren's mass murder because the world is kill or be killed. It's dog eat dog. And this is exactly the same rhetoric mass shooters use. I think Ishiyama also has this wrong. Indigenous people in North America, African people, and even Jewish people after the Holocaust did not swamp the descendants with guilt, but with the choice to be better and to fix the wrongs that their ancestors have committed. For the Indigenous people in Canada, this was the stolen land, the stolen culture, the death of language, the torture in residential or industrial schools. It was the death of children and animals, but more importantly, it is also acknowledgement and the desire for their children's future to be better because the settlers stole that future. I won't speak for Africa because the channel African Propaganda is way better, but the Jewish people, they wanted to be treated like human beings. They wanted the Holocaust to be recognized. Jewish people after the Second World War were stateless and wanted to live equally with the Europeans and gain everything they had lost. But Europe did not do that. Europe did not fight anti-Semitism, but instead created the settler colonial state that is Israel. A place where all the Jews can go and rid Europe and America of them. The creation of the fake state of Israel has anti-Semitic origins, and the Jews who went from being prosecuted went to being colonizers of Palestinians. They stole that land, and they have claimed it as their own. For the Japanese, yes, they may be militarily weak, and yes, they were kicked out of their colonies, but to deny the crimes they committed and to live without taking responsibility is problematic. People may pin the crimes on the state, but the citizens bought in and performed their roles in these crimes. Japan should not live in fear because of retaliation. If they do, it is because they haven't taken responsibility or acknowledged their wrongdoings. For those on the right, you have to change your mindsets, because these crimes impact people and have long-standing material consequences. If the right and the state continue to deny these, there may be future crimes and acts of repression. What I'm stressing here is that people should not take pride in the crimes, nor should they be overwhelmed with guilt, but they should at least be better people and be aware that the crimes they have committed in the past have impacted people in the present, for the past is linked to the present. So, why do I care? Why should you care? Why should we care? In his conclusion, Umberto Eco phrases this better than I can ever, but I won't quote him because I want to save my own words. I believe we should care about fascists or Japanism propaganda because it is our responsibility to fight fascism and uncover it wherever it festers. Because if we do not, there is a possibility that will radicalize young men. Although this is one text in the grand scheme of things, I think it's important for people to understand there are words that kill and have killed, that this text is part of an overall system that radicalizes young boys, and this one is very dangerous in my opinion because it is almost commanding the reader to fight, to kill, and to gain freedom by getting rid of the opposition. So leftists, we have to stand up and we have to fight this. We have to warn others of the words that kill because enough have been killed. The least we could do is warn those who are falling into fascism and tell them that fascism is an illusion and that in reality it does not give the middle class or these young men what they desire, but it only serves the capitalists and the elite. So I raise my hand and I say down with fascism, down with Japanism, down with white supremacy, and down with hate. And I hope we could head towards a brighter future where hatred does not rule over the hearts of men, women, and non-binary people. So this is the end. This video took me a long time to do. I started in April 28th and now it's June 9th, so please subscribe. Reading Attack on Titan over and over and screenshotting it was a pain in the butt, so subscribe because I worked hard on this and I actually researched and wrote stuff down. Also, there will be more, so if you do subscribe, you might see more of my content. I have a One Piece video that shows what anti-fascism looks like and what freedom really means. And after that, I have a Zionism video plan, the one that I did earlier, like last year. I think I went too soft on the Zionists, so this time I want to come in swinging. And after that, I want to do a Mask of Fascism Part 2 with Ukraine and Russia at the focus. And after that, I don't know what I want to do. I kind of want to look at wolves and wolves in Japan. That's also a cool thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'll come up with something after I make those 3 vids. But this one was not fun. Attack on Titan was not fun. It's kind of like reading the rumbling. I think to some it was like, whoa, it's so cool. He's crushing people. He's... For me, it was horrifying. I was like, holy crap, Ishiyama, what the fuck are you showing us? So yeah, that's the video. Thank you for watching. I hope it wasn't too long. If it was, let me know down below. Yeah. Oh, right. I was gonna do a review of it. Attack on Titan, solid 1. Just kidding. It's actually a 0. Screw it. 0 out of 10. Not good. Naked Titans fighting and punching